Go, and we need to get started because I'm going to be long-winded tonight. I'm just going to talk and talk and talk. So we have 4 chapters that we're going to try to cover. This is a new record for the evening. Plus, I got a little extra information. So tonight we're going to be talking about the story of Samson. And so we're going to be in Judges 13 eventually. But we're going to start off in the book of Numbers first. And so we're going to talk about, before we get into the story of Samson, talk about the Nazarites. And I'm not controlling. Presentation went off the air. Okay, we'll see what we can do here. We may be able to make this work. We have the technology. Maybe. That's right. You gotta love technical difficulties. Yep. This is not an us issue, it's an internet issue. I'm not getting internet connectivity. So I think it's a Cox issue. Well, let me see. Well, like I said, it's not anything that we're doing on here. It's we don't have internet. So it's not. Maybe. Looky there. There's always a back door. There's always a way where there's a will, right? Well, at least we say so. So tonight we're going to talk about the Nazarite. And so the Nazarite is not the same as a Nazarene. Jesus was a Nazarene because he was from Nazareth. The Nazarite is a vow that was taken. And so it's given in the law, and it is a form of dedication to God, essentially. And so I want to talk about this because it will help explain what we're going to see in the next few chapters here. So in number 6, we get the the qualifications or the restrictions of what it means to be a Nazarite. And people who would understand the law, so especially at this time, the Jewish people who were staying in the law of God, in the word that they had, would understand what a Nazarite was. It's kind of implied in the scripture, but I want to read it to you. So it says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or a woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazarite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, and must not drink vinegar made from the wine or other fermented drink. They must not drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. As long as they remain under the Nazarite vow, they must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or skins. Nothing. Nada. Okay? That's one of the main things. During the entire period of the Nazarite vow, no razor may be used on their head. They must be holy until the period of their dedication to the Lord is over. They must let their hair grow long. So a lot of people in the 60s and 70s were Nazarites, apparently. Jerry was a Nazarite. All right. So, what? Still am. There you go. So that's the second thing. You cannot cut your hair while you take this vow. Throughout the period of their dedication to the Lord, the Nazarite must not go near a dead body. Period. Nothing dead. Even if their own father or mother or brother or sister dies, they must not make themselves ceremonially unclean on account of them, because the symbol of their dedication to God is on their head. Throughout the period of their dedication, they are consecrated to the Lord. So that's the main steps. It goes on to say that if you take this Nazarite vow and somebody dies in your presence, because it's one thing to not go and visit the dead, go to your family or whatever, but say you're sitting there and the guy next to you has a heart attack and dies. It says, oh, not a problem. Shave your head, start over, and do the whole vow over again. Because once you make this vow to the Lord, you are consecrated to it and you have to fulfill it. So if you said, I'm going to do this for 6 months, it could be 5 months and 29 days. You get next to a dead body, you shave your head, you start over. And you do it for another 6 months if you're going to fulfill that Nazarite vow. So the reason I wanted to bring that up is because tonight we're going to talk about Samson. And Samson is going to be a unique Nazarite, because he is not making this vow himself as an adult or as a young man, but instead he is being born a Nazarite. God has dedicated him from the womb to be this judge, to be this one who would deliver Israel. So that's where we're going to pick up the story. Like I said, we're going to start in Judges 13, and we are going to make amazing blazing speed, and we're going to go through 13, 14, 15, and 16. Okay, I think I'm ready. Here we go. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, you are now very old, and there is still very large areas of land to be. I think we got the wrong thing. It should say, we should be in Judges, and it says Joshua. Okay, we might have to go old school on this. Yep. Okay, we're going to go analog. So those of you at home, follow along. Get your books out. We will pick back up in chapter 14 when it goes back to the right chapter. All right. Judges 13. The problem is, my eyes don't do analog nearly as well. That's right, and it's really hard to, I can't expand this and zoom in. All right, so it says, again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. It's that same saga over and over again. God delivers them, and what do? They do evil in the eyes of the Lord once again. So God turned them over this time to the Philistines, their neighbors just to the west, basically, that shouldn't be there because the tribe of Dan and stuff was supposed to kick them all out, and they didn't. And so, like what we read when we went into Judges, the Israelites, when they took the land, didn't complete it. And so all of a sudden, you got these people living there, and when Israel was turned away from God, when they were doing their own thing, God turned around and used the Philistines to oppress them. And so they made them subject, basically, to the Philistines for 40 years. And then it says, a certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, you are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart to God from birth. He will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So, again, this is something very unique. Samson is unique in all Scripture in that he did not choose to take a vow, and it was not a vow for a certain amount of time. This was a vow from birth for life. God says he is going to be my deliverer, my judge. He will be the one to bring deliverance. So, therefore, even his mom couldn't drink anything from the vine, or eat anything from the vine, or do any of those things, anything unclean, because he said, now that you are going to conceive here, and it's again miraculous, she had not been able to conceive up to that point, and he says, now you're going to, and this angel tells her, but you basically now have to be a Nazarite until this child is born. Here's your dedication. You have to not do any of those things. When the woman went to her husband and told him, a man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I did not ask him where he came from, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, you will conceive and give birth to a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazarite of God from birth until the day of his death. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, O Lord, I beg you, let the man of God you sent to us come again and teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born. Interesting thing here is they thought it was just like a prophet. A man of God came through, told them. But she said, he kind of looked like an angel. But it was just a man. And so they're thinking, oh, man of God. So they prayed and they said, hey, God, let that man come back by our way. Let him come wander back by here. Because Manoah's like, I want to talk to him. I want to find out what I'm supposed to do if I'm going to raise somebody who's been dedicated to God and chosen, that God has chosen personally. I want to find out what I'm supposed to do. And so it says, God heard Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman while she was out in the field. But her husband Manoah was not with her. The woman hurried to tell her husband, he's here, the man who appeared to me the other day. Manoah got up to follow his wife. When he came to the man, he said, are you the one who talked to my wife? I am, he said. So Manoah asked him, when your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule for the boy's life and work? And the angel of the Lord answered, your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, or drink any wine or other fermented drink, not eat anything unclean, but she must do everything that I have commanded her. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, we would like to stay until we prepare, like you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you. The angel of the Lord replied, even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord. Manoah did not realize that it was the angel of the Lord. So he's still thinking, I'm just talking to this guy who's bringing me this word. It says, then Manoah inquired the angel of the Lord, what is your name so that we may honor you when your word comes true? He replied, why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding. That's an interesting thing right there. He's like, I could tell you, but it would just blow your mind. You don't even understand my name. It's beyond your understanding. And it says, then Manoah took a young goat together with the grain offering and sacrificed it on a rock to the Lord. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? We saw that with Gideon. We saw that with some of the others where they put this offering out before the Lord on the rock. And it says, and the Lord did an amazing thing. While Manoah and his wife watched, as the flame blazed up from the altar towards the heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. And so, wow, this guy ascended up. We now know it was an angel of the Lord. And here's their response. And this goes along with what I always say when we encounter angels. They saw this man go up in the flame, and they went, we are doomed to die. Here we go. We're going to die. And it says, he said to his wife, we have seen God. This is it. Man, it's been a great life. It's been a great day. We offered a sacrifice. Now we're going to die. It's over. We're done. And then his wife answered, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things or now told us this. So she said, honey, if the Lord is just going to kill us, why did he accept our offering and give us this prophecy? To which Manoah went, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Mahanaim Dan between Zorah and Eshtal. Okay, so hopefully this will jump back on track here now. And so he grew up in this valley. The Soric Valley is what it's called. And it's up from Gaza and down from like Hebron and a little south of Jerusalem and stuff. And it's this big, wide valley that was farming communities and stuff like that. And so that's where Samson is born. But the thing with it is at the end of the valley, like I said, is the cities of like Gaza and Ashkelon and things like that. Those are the cities of the Philistines. And so this valley is the main thoroughfare for them to go up into the hill country. And like we've talked about so many times, even with Gideon and stuff like that, the Israelites stayed up in the hills. The Philistines, much like when we read about the Moabites and stuff, and the other armies that we were talking about with Gideon and stuff, but they had heavier armor, chariots, stuff like that. Even when we see later with like Goliath coming forward, heavy armor, spears, swords, shields, and all that. Where the Israelites were less armed. They're kind of up in the hill country. And so where Samson is born is kind of that transitionary area where there's some hills they can get up in, but it's also a big open valley that had a lot of crops and farmland and stuff in it. So that's the setting for this, basically this entire story. So it goes on then, it says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. Warning. Warning. Here's the thing with Samson. He was not that great of a guy. And when we read this story, you're going to realize he had a lot of shortcomings, a lot of sin in his life. However you want to say that, rebellion, whatever you want to call it, Samson did not take his vow nearly as seriously as his parents did. But Samson was just kind of, I'm going to do what I want. And so it says he went down to Timnah, saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. Here's another thing. This is not that outlandish, apparently, for Samson to be thinking about this. It shows how far Israel had slid, basically, in their dedication to God. They're doing the very thing God told them through Moses and then through Joshua. They are intermarrying with the Philistine people. Not only are the Philistines oppressing them, but they're intermarrying with them. They're starting to become part of the Philistines. And God said, this is why you need to drive the people out, because if you don't, you're going to intermarry with them. You're going to worship their gods. You're going to accept their practices. You're going to do this. And this is a great example. Here's Samson, dedicated from birth to God. And what does he do? Hey, I think I'm going to go get a Philistine wife. He fell right into that same trap. But it was something that was, we're seeing a bigger picture here. That the people that were living close, like they were in that valley, and really had good contact with the Philistines, they had no problem intermingling back and forth with them. So it says, his father and his mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? They're still seeing the dedication to God. They're still saying, don't do this. But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She is the right one for me. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Understand this phrase. They didn't understand that God was using this. It doesn't mean that this was God's perfect plan, but God knew what Samson was going to do, and he said, I can use this. I can use this to put some hatred, if you want to call it that, or some strife between Samson and the Philistine people. Because up to this point, obviously, Samson didn't care if it was a Philistine. Oh, that's fine. They're our neighbors. And he was intermingling with the people. And so Samson's choice led God to a place where he could say, I can use this to where Samson is going to despise the Philistines and where he will start to deliver Israel, essentially. So Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have torn a young goat. Lion jumps out. Samson kills it. Bare hands. Boom. Spirit of the Lord's on him. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with that. And so he was given this superhuman strength. And so he kills this lion. What's the problem with that? Now he has a dead lion. He's in the presence of a dead body. And he made it dead. Okay? And so, oh man, but what's he going to do? Go back to the womb, start over? Nope, he keeps moving forward. But he has this occasion there where it automatically puts a little bit of a damper in things. Then it says, but he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. So now he's not only killed this lion, he didn't tell mom and dad because they would say, oh, you've been in the presence of a dead body, you got to cleanse yourself. He's like, nope, I'm just not going to say anything. And then he's going back down to see his fiancée, and he's like, hey, you know what? This is where I killed that lion. I think I'm going to go take a look. So now he's willfully going and doing something. This is no longer, I defended myself. This is a willfully sinning against what his pledge is. And so he says, and he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. Lion carcass is apparently a good place for bees to build a little hive in there, and they used that. And it says he scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. I think that would be classified as unclean when you're scooping honey out of the carcass of a dead animal and you've taken a Nazarite vow. But, you know, I'm not an expert on the law, but I'm thinking that really is not a good thing. It says, when he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they ate it, they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Probably a good thing, especially judging by your guys' all facial reaction when I said he scooped that honey out of her. You're like, oh, what? But, okay, mom and dad ate it. They didn't know. Samson doesn't say anything. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. When it came time for a wedding, they would do a week-long feast. This is not just an Israelite type thing. This is a Philistine custom as well. And so they're going to have this long feast leading up to this wedding ceremony after about 7 days. So it's a big to-do, a big event. And it says, when the people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions. Here's the guys that are going to watch over Samson as he gets ready to get married. Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said to them. If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. That is a huge price. Linen garments and full sets of clothes. I mean, he's asking for a ransom here. And so he says, if I give you this riddle and you can't figure it out, you owe me 30 sets of clothes, including the linen garments. And they're like, ooh, that's pretty steep. He says, but if you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Tell us this riddle. They said, let's hear it. So one of them is going to get 30 sets of clothes, either Samson or the hosts. And so he says, is that a good deal? They went, yeah, we'll take it. Give us the riddle. So he replied, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. For 3 days they could not give the answer. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's households to death. Little motivation there, right? They said, could you speak to your husband for us? Just kind of get the answer out of him so we don't have to pay this big debt. And if you don't, we're going to kill you and your family. Wow, what a great thing. Said, do you invite us here to steal our property? The people are coming back to the bride and saying, you made us as attendants, you made us this big group, this feast, but did you bring us here just to steal from us? Is that what the whole object of this is you're just going to take advantage of us here? Then Samson's wife threw herself on him sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. Oh. And then it says, you've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I can understand you've given them this riddle, but you haven't even told me. Oh, you must hate me. Oh. It says, I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied. I haven't told anybody the answer, so chill a little bit here. And she says, so why would I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. At this point, Samson was ready to have them kill him. She cried for 7 straight days. And it says, so on the 7th day, he finally told her because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. Before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And Samson said to them, and guys, I don't recommend you using this in your Hallmark card for Valentine's Day. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. That's a term of endearment. Come on. But he says, yeah, you tricked me. You tricked my wife, is it. If you hadn't used her, you'd have never got that answer. So you cheated. And they're like, oh, no, we didn't do that. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Now, Samson is already ticked off at these Philistine people because they pressured his wife, they threatened them, and they pressured her to get the answer. So they gave the answer, and now he's bound to give them clothes. A lot of clothes. 30 sets of linen garments and clothes. And Samson's got to come up with this. So it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. His anger was burning against the Philistines. So he went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. So there you go. I need 30 sets of clothes. I'm going to go kill 30 guys. And I'm going to take their clothes and bring them back here. So that's what he does. He pays off his debt by killing 30 Philistines. So he started his little war. Again, when you look at that, it was things that Samson chose of his own free will, but God used them for what ultimately he was going to need. Here, all of a sudden, Samson, who had no problem intermingling with the Philistines and just hanging out with them and spending time with them and going to their towns and what have you, now has this animosity towards them. You did this to me. And the decision that he made early on to take a Philistine wife is going to keep coming back to him. And it's going to keep burning in this thing, and it just keeps building on itself. But we have to understand, God is not making these people do this. God is using the situation that they have set up, and they keep freely choosing. And they just keep escalating this thing. So it says, burning with anger, he returned to his father's home. Samson said, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm not going to stay in this Philistine land for any more time. I paid off my debt. I'm going back to my homeland. Up the road he goes. And Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who had attended him at the feast. So dad goes, well, apparently he's gone. Hey, you, come marry my daughter. So he gives his daughter away in marriage, again, to someone other than Samson. So Samson gets jilted big time because he got mad, he left, and so dad says, we'll just marry her off to somebody else. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. So he's trying to make amends now. Hey, I want to come back, so let's do this. It's the end of the season here. I want to make this right. So he said, I'm going to my wife's room. But her father would not let him go in. I was so sure that you hated her, he said, that I gave her to your companion. I figured you were done with her. You didn't want anything to do with her. You were so mad when you left, so we just went ahead and married her off to somebody else. She's not your wife anymore, so see ya, you're done. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. What a great dad. I figured you ditched my first daughter, so here, marry my second one. You seem like a good guy. You brought a goat. I mean, here, let's do this. But Samson is at this point just fuming. He had been jilted so hard, he is just furious. So Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. So his hatred for the Philistines grows even greater. And he's like, I have been, burnt by them. Every time I turn around, I'm having something else worse happen. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails. You know how much animals love fire, flame. So he took these foxes and he tied their tails together and put a torch and tied that to that rope that he tied them together with or whatever and just lets them go. This is the time of harvest. This would be like sending them out into a cornfield at this time of year here. So it says, he lit the torches and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain together with the vineyards and olive groves. They devastated this valley. And he's like, that'll fix them. If you can imagine the damage that they did as they went through everything that was dry and ready for harvest. When the Philistines asked who did this, they were told Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion. So the Philistines went up and burned her with her and her father to death. Isn't this a lovely story? I will have to say that this chapter is really glossed over in the kids' lesson. So this whole little section is just kind of not so much there. But yeah, that's the Philistines. God is also letting us see the character of those people. And so they, mess with Samson. Samson goes messes with them back and forth. And if you don't get me the answer to this riddle, I'm going to kill you and your household. They get the riddle, but then Samson gets revenge on them, so they turn around and they kill her and her household anyway and burn their houses down and everybody with them. And it said, Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. So now Samson's hatred towards the Philistines is pretty much complete. He is out for revenge. He says, I've had it with them. And God is not trying to get him to hate like that, but God wanted to get him to the point where he was not comfortable with them. You cannot be a Philistine and deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. You can't live like the Philistines. You can't intermingle and intermarry with them. You can't have that relationship and deliver Israel. If anything, at the point of where this started, Samson was going to lead more Israelites into the Philistines. Even though he was chosen by God at birth to be this deliverer, it seemed like he was the one dragging people into the Philistines' homes. And so finally, through his own choice of actions and the consequences that came through them, and God allowing them to grow the way they did, then he's at an all-out war with them. And he says, I'm just going to keep getting my revenge. And so it goes on and it says, he attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The people of Judah asked, why have you come to fight us? The Israelites are still pretty friendly with the Philistines. They've been subject to them. They've been oppressed by them, but they're not killing us at this point, so okay. And so the Israelites have even fallen into this complacency with being subject to them. And so when the Philistines are so furious with Samson from what he did, and they draw up battle lines and they come up the valley into the into the area of Judah, and they come up that Soric Valley, the people of Israel went, why are you here? Why are you coming to fight us? We didn't do anything to you. We're paying our taxes. We're being quiet. We're staying out of your hair. What's going on? And it says, we have come to take Samson prisoner. They answered, to do to him as he did to us. And so they came up and said, basically, we're not here to fight you guys, but we'll be glad to, unless you turn over Samson to us. We've had enough of this. And so either you hand him over, or we're going to just lay siege to Israel and kill as many people as we want. So then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? I said, Samson, they're our oppressor. And Samson's going, yeah, that's a good reason to fight them. And they're going, no, we're happy. We're not happy because we're oppressed, but at least we're alive. And so they went down and said, Samson, don't you realize that these guys rule us? They control our livelihood, our daily living. We have to be somewhat, friendly to them. We have to work this out with them. Said, what have you done to us? He answered, I merely did to them what they to me. So they're going, man, what did you do, buddy? He says, got a little revenge. They said to him, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. We're not going to stand behind you and fight. We're not going to take a stand against the Philistines. Matter of fact, what we've done is we've come to just give you over to them. We're going to roll over because they're too powerful. Samson said, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. Agreed, they answered. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came towards him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Ruh-roh. They tied him up. They said, here, we're going to hand you over. We're done. Philistines have won. Game, set, match. But yet when Samson started to walk up to the Philistine lines, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He busted those new ropes like nothing. And it says, finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. So he took his jawbone and went to work. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. If you have the King James Version, it's a different word, but we'll go with jawbone, or donkeys, okay. It says, with a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Doesn't he sound like them in the wilderness? He's like, man, I'm thirsty. God, you gave me this victory, but man, I'm thirsty. Now I'm going to die of thirst and get handed over to the Philistines. Man, this is horrible. Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakkore, and it is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. Ruh-roh. He went to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn, we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the two posts and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So he just ripped the gates off the city in kind of his little rebellious act here, and he picked them up and he carried them up to the top of the hill. Now, we do not know exactly the size of these gates, but they were not small. This was a miraculous feat. Nobody else was going to be doing this. And it says he ripped the posts and everything out of the ground. He just took these gates off, and as his little show, because they were waiting for him outside, so he just got up in the middle of the night, ripped the gates off, and walked out. Left the gates, let the city unsecured, and said, there. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Soric whose name was Delilah. So we have seen now that Samson was kind of a Philistine womanizer. He's been down to the prostitute's house. He had a wife down there. He's been down looking at the ladies. And now he's in the valley of Soric, and there was a woman there whose name was Delilah. And again, Samson, being the old hard-hearted man that he is, went, "Oh, I'm in love with her now." And once again goes down this path. And it says, the rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him." So once again, his downfall, a lady. And they said, "Oh, you can get to him this way." That's the one weakness that he has right now. So, Delilah, we'll give you all kinds of wealth. Get his secret. And so it says, each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. That's an astronomical amount of money. And each one of the 5 Philistine rulers was going to give her 1,100 shekels. And so she's going, hey, I could live the rest of my life and never even think about having debt or not having enough money. So, man, 5,500 shekels, whoo, I can do this. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Should that not be a red flag? But he's like, well, okay, sounds good. So Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man. That's the secret to my strength. Tie me up with new bowstrings, I'm done." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings, and that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hiding in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So she's trying to lure him in. He gives her a lie and says, okay. And then we're back to our game. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come on now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." That's what it is, new ropes. Which is funny because if you remember back just in the last chapter, they tied him up with new ropes and he busted them like charred chaff and so whatever. Anyway, so it says, so Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then, with men hiding in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. And he replied, if you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? So 3 times she's asked, 3 times he's lied. Each time he lies, she does what he says, this will make me weak, and it kind of goes back and forth in this game. So finally she says, how can you say you love me? You won't even tell me the truth. You're lying to me. This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. He's like, give me peace. Stop. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. And there's the truth. The one thing that he really held on to with the Nazarite vow. He had the big party, served wine, probably ate grapes, came in contact with a dead body, ate unclean things, but he finally said, okay, it's my hair. Cut my hair, I'm done. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more. He has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And so he's still thinking, I got this. I'm this big, strong guy. I got this. But when his head was shaved, the presence of the Lord wasn't there anymore. And the Lord didn't come upon him. He just thought, I can do this on my own. I got this. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. So here's Samson, the big champion, pushing a sledge, grinding grain. Blinded, chained to it. Not much of a judge, huh? Much of a deliverer, it doesn't look like. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. To them, this is a battle between gods. And their God finally was victorious. It wasn't that Samson was such a screw-up, he messed up his vow. It was, our God must be so great. So they called together this great assembly. And when they did, it says, when the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands. So it says, the one who laid waste to our land and multiplied our slain. So they brought him in there as amusement, sport. The people all gathered in this great gathering hall, this temple, to offer sacrifices to Dagon, to have a time of worship for him. And they said, bring in Samson. Let's show him off and show how great Dagon is. Let's show how weak the God of Israel is. Bring Samson in here so we can mock him and make fun of him. He killed so many of our people, but now look at him. He's nothing. Bring him in here. It says, while they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. So, big area. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. And let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached towards the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtal, in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had led Israel for 20 years. So kind of a weird judge story. It wasn't that he came and said, "We're going to reinstitute a proper worship of God." And it wasn't and then he lived for 20 more years and the people stayed faithful as long as he was there. It was, Samson was kind of a messed up judge, but he led Israel out of the oppression of the Philistines for 20 years and then died with his final blow to the Philistines to kind of break that grip, that stronghold, by taking out their leadership. The kings of all 5 cities, they're all sitting there together and he takes them out. So Samson has a weird kind of a place in Scripture. He wasn't a great guy when it comes to following the law of God. He wasn't a great guy when it comes to morals or anything else. But yet, in the end, it was God that he turned to and said, "Let me do this one thing. Let me do something right, God." And I don't know, maybe some of us feel that way sometimes. "God, just let me do something right." And Samson said, "Let me have this last thing." Now, I want to show you just a couple of pictures. We got just a couple of minutes. This is the Soric Valley. And so I took this picture from a place called Beth Shemesh, and I'm looking towards Hebron and Jerusalem right there. So we're looking to the east, kind of northeast, up the valley. The hills up there are the hills of Judah. So that's where he wound up carrying the gates of the city up to, of Gaza. But that's the valley. This is looking straight across from Beth Shemesh, and the stuff you see there that looks like, buildings and stuff right now, that is basically the area that Samson was born in. Just up the hill, just a little bit, kind of along that ridge. That's where he was born. This is the area between Zoar and Escalon there, and the valley of Elah and all that. So as we keep turning down, so we've been looking to the east, now we're looking north, and now we're going to be looking kind of, I guess, west, a little bit northwest, because it kind of curves up there. But that's looking down to Gaza. So this is the valley, these are the fields that this all basically took place in. Between where he was born all the way down to Gaza, it was in this valley. Between these ridges, that's where he carried the gates up through. That's where he released the foxes into. That's where he killed the lion when he was on his way down for his wedding. It all basically took place in this area. And the thing that people talk about and come up with this story is they say, how could any man bring down a building of that size by getting between 2 pillars? I mean, seriously. If you got a structure of that magnitude, how in the world could you bring down something like that? And how could one person get to 2 pillars like that and actually push them down? And so that has been one of the controversies of this story, is it's just not realistic. Do you know how big Samson would have to be to reach 2 pillars of any of these temples that they found archaeologically? Until they started doing some archaeology. And in the northern part of Tel Aviv, they found a Philistine temple. They found another one south of there a little ways. And they dig up these temples. They date back to roughly the time of Samson. And they're looking at the structure in them. And this picture says a lot. This is what they found. That the Philistine temples, in the design that they had 2 central columns that were roughly 6 feet apart. And they held up the superstructure of the roof. So they had these two columns that went up, and everything braced off of them. And that was kind of the center point of what they would do in their worship. So archaeologically, we know that a man who could reach 6 feet, I can reach 6 feet, crossed, could reach these two pillars. Now, this is not the temple that Samson brought down. So don't go back and say, Jeff showed us a picture of the... No, Jeff didn't show you that. Jeff showed you a picture of a Philistine temple and the fact that they have proven that the way they built these temples was with a central support system, 2 main columns that were set on stone bases, and then they had wooden supports, basically wooden legs that went up to hold the main superstructure because everything kind of went into it. So it's not that you could tear the whole building down, but if you knock those columns out, the whole thing falls in on itself, which is pretty much exactly what it says. Building didn't just fall over, it fell down. It collapsed, killing everybody in it. And so archaeologically, it makes sense because the Philistines are pretty much the only people who build a temple like this. So whoever wrote this story either knew exactly what they were talking about or they got a really lucky guess. And I'm going to go with they knew exactly what they were talking about because this story is how it happened. This is a true thing. And so Samson brought down the house with his little performance there. But he really did. He was able to do that because of the way this was designed and the way that this was set up. And archaeologically, it supports what we see with that. So, all right. Questions or comments? Yes?
So was Israel, after he did that to the Colosseum and everything, were they able to overtake the Philistines then? Or?
It began the end of that oppression. Unfortunately, it didn't completely free them of the Philistines, but it broke that initial oppression. But actually, it's kind of a back and forth saga with them all the way up through the time of David. It's back and forth. David fought with the Philistines. So it broke that initial overruling oppression on them. So they had that relief again. But just like the Israelites themselves fell back into sin, they struggled back and forth with the Philistines for many years after that. So, but they didn't have ultimate sway over them like they did at that point. Everybody's so quiet. He was not a good boy. No, he was not. He was a very naughty boy. Yeah. And somebody plowing with his heifer. There you go.
I mean, he's not doing it, he's not necessarily following what God wants, but God uses people even when they are not walking in his perfect plan.
Right, right. And God's plan was still fulfilled. But Samson made some bonehead choices to get there. If he would have been faithful to God, it would have played out much differently. We would have a Deborah or a Gideon type story. But because he was unfaithful, he had to take the hard knocks. But God's plan was ultimately still fulfilled and revealed in that. But it does also show us God's redemptive quality. I mean, of course, this is before Christ. This is before we have the forgiveness that Christ gave to us. But even then, God's redemptive quality, he kept giving Samson chances. And He is. He is. He's included in that pantheon of all the faithful of God. But he didn't seem faithful, but yet he was. And so I think it does give us hope to realize that, sometimes even when we mess up, God has still got his hand upon us and he's still got his eye on us. And so, thankfully, we just actually have the benefit of now having grace and mercy from the blood of Christ. So that makes it even better. We can still be screw-ups and still be used by God and still loved by God. Yay! So, yes?
I never knew in all these years of reading the Bible and going to Sunday school, when did the Nazarite?
Yeah. Yep. It could be male or female. Yep. Again, it was a time where you would dedicate yourself to the Lord. So you could set your own period of it. And we see what would appear to be Nazarite vows even in the New Testament with like Paul, where you have Paul and some of the other people going in and going before the priest and shaving their head. Well, that would be the conclusion of a Nazarite vow, is you would then shave your head because you've concluded that. And you'd have to go do that before the priests in the temple at the time of New Testament and stuff like that. But it was a time of dedication where you would say, I am going to devote myself to God and serving him, being his servant, doing that. And so you would take that time period and you would abstain from all the things they talked about, fermented drink and wine and anything from the vine, anything that's made from any product from that, olive, or not olive, but grape vinegars and all that kind of stuff. You had to stay away from raisins, everything. And then you had to stay away from the dead bodies because those were things that could or would desecrate you. And so they're things that in the law you had to be cleansed of. When you talk about dead bodies and things like that, you would have a period where you would have to go and re-cleanse yourself. Anybody, if you come in contact with these bodies. And so you would set yourself apart and say, I am not going to eat anything unclean, come in contact with anything unclean, do anything unclean, whatever, for this period of time because I am serving God and I am giving myself to him. Absolutely not. God chose him to be a Nazarite. His mother, when she found out that she couldn't have children, and God said, you're going to have a child, then she signed on to the Nazarite vow, basically, because the angel told her, you now have to follow this because the one that you carry is going to be a Nazarite, and he can't even be unclean from your womb. And so she did. She followed it strictly. And you can kind of see the hints back from his mom and dad the whole time, and him knowing what he should do, because when he killed the lion, he didn't say anything to them. Because they would have said, oh my gosh, you've broken your vow. You've got to go back and be rededicated and re-cleansed of. But he's like, I ain't going to say anything. It wasn't. I mean, I think it was. He understood God, but I think that there was that rebellion in there that he didn't choose that. But yet God chose him to be used in that way. And he fought against it. So what we see is that calling on his life, what? Oh, killing all those people would not have been a good thing for his Nazarite vow. I mean, once he was unleashed, yeah, it went way downhill. He killed the lion. That was bad. 3,000 people, 1,000 people here, a few hundred here. Yeah, that was not good for his Nazarite vow.
Do you think that he ever looked at that situation and thought, this isn't fair? These rules are not, you didn't give these rules to us as people
Right.
to follow for our whole lives.
Define fair. Yeah, it was not fair from a human perspective of he couldn't do the things that other people could do, but he was called by God to be set apart and to do a mighty thing for him. So if anything, what it shows us is the exact opposite of what Christ did when he came. He became a man, and he was dedicated from his birth, essentially. He was not a Nazarite, but he was dedicated, and he did not sin or rebel. And he came so that he could pay our debt. But Samson, he was born under a kind of a similar situation, chosen by God to be a deliverer for Israel, and he rebelled against it. And he just didn't want any part of it at that point. And I think when he started killing Philistines, he was not thinking, oh, I'm doing this for God. He's thinking, oh, I'm going to, it was coming from inside him, and God was blessing it, rather than him going, I have now become a mighty warrior of God. No, I think he was on an act of vengeance. But God used that for his own purpose. But as you can see, Samson was not the judge who rallied the people like Gideon or like Deborah or anything else. He didn't say, hey, let's all get together and go fight the Philistines, because all the people around him went, hey, we're going to turn you over to the Philistines. See you later, buddy. And they wanted nothing to do with it because they were content. And so he came at a time in Israelite history that I don't know if anybody would have rallied them, because they were oppressed, but it wasn't the same oppression as the Midianites. It wasn't the same oppression. The what? No. Nope. Because they were complacent. They were like, this is what it is now. And so they just kind of rolled over and were just sitting there. And so it took something like a Samson to be the catalyst for change. And so he wasn't the same kind of a judge that led Israel to that kind of a restoration and brought them into a point where they were rallying against their enemies and overcame them. It was a point where everything that he did was ultimately God's hand upon it. And in his death, he was finally able to break some of that oppression. And then the people realized, oh, wait, maybe this was the real deal. But at the time, even though he was a great warrior and he was killing all these Philistines, the people still wouldn't get behind him. He was still serving kind of on his own. He was the sacrifice for Israel to be able to start and inflict change.
Is there a significance, do you think, when it says that he did not know the Lord had left him? When there was there a relationship between him and the Lord prior to that he had fallen so far away from that he didn't even recognize it?
I think that there was enough of a relationship with the Lord that he knew where his strength was coming from. But I don't think that he was giving God credit for his actions. And so when he got up and his hair was cut, he didn't go, oh no, I'm in trouble. He's like, I got this. And he charged out there. Real similar to what Israel had done in the past. The place where I took that picture from of the valley, I'm standing at a place called Beth Shemesh. Beth Shemesh is where Israel went to fight, or actually up from there, but when they went to fight the Philistines, and God did not tell them to go into battle. He did not tell them to take the Ark of the Covenant. And they grabbed the Ark out of the tabernacle, and they went to fight the Philistines. And the Philistines kicked their little boo-heinies and stole the Ark. Now you go, wait a minute, how could they steal the Ark? If anybody touched it besides the Levites, they died. Well, because the presence of the Lord was not on that thing when the Philistines came and got it. Because God did not say, take the Ark into battle. He didn't say, lead out with that. They went, we got the good luck charm. We can't lose. We don't need to ask for God's permission to go to battle. We don't need God to tell us to take the Ark. We've got the Ark. Grab it, guys. Let's go to war. So they grabbed it. They went down. Philistines wiped them out, took the Ark, took it back to their cities. The funny thing is God protected the Ark then, because every place they took it from the Philistine cities, they had to kind of keep moving around because people were getting struck with tumors, they call them in Scripture. It's a very nice way of interpreting that. Some have interpreted the word in Hebrew to be severe hemorrhoids on the whole city. But they got tumors on the whole city. Their gods, when they took him into the temple of Dagon, they went back the next morning, and when the Ark of the Covenant was there, they came back the next morning, and Dagon was laying on his face on the ground before the Ark. Because God's like, that thing ain't standing in front of me. Down it came. So they stand him back up, thinking, it must have been a little earthquake or something. Let's stand him back up here. And they come back the next day, and he is shattered on the threshold. His hands are busted off and all that kind of stuff. So God was saying, you ain't putting my Ark in your temple in front of some other god. You know, I don't bow to anybody. And so whatever they would take this, they would have things inflicted on them. Rats came and overrun their cities, things like that. I mean, they really brought a lot of calamity on themselves by bringing this ark back to the Philistines. So, to get to the end of this story, they took it and they loaded it on a cart. Not good. Ark is never supposed to be on a cart. You have to carry it with the poles, and it can only be Levites. Philistines don't know this. So they pick it up, they put it on a cart, they take some young cows, and they send it up the valley. They send it up the valley of Soric. It comes to a place called Beth Shemesh, which is where I took the picture from. As it gets there, the cart wobbles, the ark's going to fall, a man reaches up to steady it, drops dead. It's back in Israel. You know better. Philistines had been moving it around from city to city and sticking it on carts and doing anything they wanted to. As soon as it reached back to Israel, then they knew better. And so when they steadied it, boom, they're dead. Because you do not touch the ark of the Lord. Only the Levites can put it on the poles and carry it to the tabernacle. So there's that superstition thing that kind of goes with it. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those deals of the Israelites during the time of Samson became complacent, but yet Samson still worked for the betterment of God. And he still worked towards the ultimate goal, even though the choices he was making were not always the best. God still was able to use that for his purpose and his ultimate goal. So, any other questions? I just kind of went rambling off into the distance there. All right. Yes, Ben? Don't know. How's that for an answer? Don't exactly know for sure. Sorry. Huh? Yeah, you'd have to be probably, in 40, somewhere around there, 30, 40. To have all those events take place and everything, yeah, there's time in there. So, yeah, he ruled for 20 years. So depending on when he started, how old he was when he started that, yeah. So, all right. Would somebody like to close in prayer? We're way late tonight. That long-winded preacher. Joe.
Lord, thanks for another night where we get to learn about people in the Bible, see how different they all were, showing us that not all of them were brave, like Gideon needs to be chosen before he'll lead, and Samson, who wasn't such a great guy, but still ended up doing your work for him. And we all know we're not all great people. We have our faults. And we need your help so that we can be leaders to do the right thing for you, Lord, to overcome our doubts and our sins, and just show people who you really are. Let us be leaders for you. Just thanks for everything, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.